think I'll start with one of my stories. In the book there are stories of lots of other women as well. This is a story that I knew exquisitely well. It's a pivotal story in my life for many, many years, influenced everything I did. But it wasn't until I looked at my relationship to money that I realized that this was impacting how I related to money. Much as Susan said, I thought that I was pretty clean about money. Money wasn't that important to me. When I was in grammar school, my half-sister, whom I adored and who was 16 years older than I, and living on the other side of the country, seemed always urgently in need of a financial fix. Loans to buy groceries or to turn the heat back on in winter. After my parents learned my sister was addicted to heroin, her pleas broadened to include cash to pay the drug dealer. My parents fought bitterly over whether to provide the money. My mother was willing to use all of her sizable inheritance to save my sister. My father literally became ill from the sums of money being spent. To me, it looked as though my good mother wanted to protect my sister while my bad father wanted to cut her off. From my young vantage point, it seemed that money was the only way to save my sister's life. So when I started doing this work, not only did I see money in my grandparents' lives, well, I didn't know my grandparents, but I could see how their relationship to money had filtered down to me. I saw how important money was in both of my parents' lives in very different ways. And then I could see this story, that money for me was about, not only about survival, it had really never been about survival, about food or a roof over my head, but about getting myself out of a predicament. That if catastrophe happened, that money was the only way that I could be saved. And so from that relationship to money, I never had enough money. Whatever I had to hold on to. That's not to say that I didn't have other forces that led me to, or dynamics that led me to impulsively buy things or make other decisions. But the predominant view of money was that money was something that would protect me. Even though when I looked more closely, right, as an adult, money hadn't saved my sister. And it wasn't a problem of dollars and cents. My parents had reduced it to dollars and cents, but it wasn't a problem of dollars and cents. But in my psyche, money still held this savior position. So just seeing that, just putting attention to these stories, not, you have to be on the couch or go back to the therapist. Just noticing our stories and giving attention to our feelings actually brings a great deal of change and freedom. A story of shame, because shame's huge. And also whenever we talk about money, we're in a field of shame because of the taboo and also because of having different amounts than other people. Navigating the differences is kind of tricky. And shame evoking. So someone else's story. My father put everything into making us look like an upper middle class family. You didn't have to scratch too far below the surface, though, to see the truth. In fact, just coming through our front door and seeing the lawn furniture in the living room told it all. All the kids I went to school with were wealthy, and I felt somewhat out of it because we weren't. My father wanted me to keep up the front, that we had money. When a friend was talking about her vacation, I couldn't let on that we never went anywhere because my father worked 7 days a week in his store, so I could never be myself. I got a double whammy. I felt inadequate with my peers for not having what they had and not getting to be myself with them. And I also was convinced that Dad thought there was something wrong with my mother and me. Otherwise, why would he have to pretend we were something we weren't? And a small story A small story about shopping. Shopping.
No, that doesn't have anything to do with or any of our
Or
relationship
love,
to
or
money, no. We don't do that.
My mother squirreled away money from her household budget to buy me whatever I wanted. I would hide the new dress or pair of shoes in my closet, wearing them secretly until they no longer looked brand new and they could pass underneath my dad's money radar. If my dad did discover something was new, there would be a terrible fight. My dad would yell, "We're all going to be in the poorhouse soon because your mother throws away money." My mother would try to explain that she always stayed within her household budget, but he was just angry. She'd end up sobbing in the bathroom behind a locked door. And a little story that I think is so graphic about money, in this case being intertwined with love. I fell in love with a harmonica when I was about 5 years old. We went to the music store fairly often, and every time I'd stare at the harmonicas in the case. I continually asked my parents to get this particular one for me. After about 6 months, they gave that very harmonica to my brother for his birthday and told me I was too young to have it. I was crushed and took it to mean that they loved my brother more than me. But lots of variations on that theme, right? Of favoritism or feeling neglected, feeling less than.
You have such beautiful stories threading throughout the book, including your own. And you told us a little bit about your own story. How much has that colored your work then with Women in Wealth since you've, both in doing your dissertation and then in the workshops and writing this book?
I chose that topic for my dissertation out of an experience of not inheriting money from an aunt. My aunt gave money to one of my half-brothers and not to myself and not to another half-brother. And that experience, everything's got so many facets to it, made me realize the power of inheriting and not inheriting. And that my psyche, I always wanted to be taken care of financially. I think I was raised as if there was enough money that I would never have to worry about money. But there wasn't, and my sister did shoot up a lot of money, shoot up her arm a lot of money. And my mother was really unable, as a lot of mothers and some fathers are, unable to say no to my sister. And so the dissertation was really working out envy, though the longing to be taken care of that way. And that's not to say that I grew up with plenty, more than enough. And in fact even have inherited some from my mother, but it did not put me in the position of, I went to graduate school. I did other things with my money. So, but the dissertation was, it was eye-opening to see that inheriting a large gift of money had lots of burdens and lots of strings attached, and that it was not what I imagined it to be, and what I think many people imagine it to be. That you have a life free of worry, that everything's taken care of. This is so far from the truth. So hearing stories of women, of the costs in their families sometimes, of a family that's so oriented towards making money or having money, the burdens of being gifted in such a large way, sense of inadequacy often, that their envy sometimes of women who knew how to support themselves and had struggled and worked in the world, the insecurities of not knowing how to make it in the world, or being seen or liked for your money, or afraid that people are wanting your money, the experience of having people want to be with you because of your money. It's tricky. It's a lot of hardship there as well. So I think it opened the door for feeling more compassion for other people's situations, not just my own, because we tend to just know what we know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing, another way that the taboo, I think, deprives us all of the richness of understanding what it's like to, pick strawberries when you're 6 years old to buy shoes for school, or be driven to school in a limousine by a chauffeur and feeling embarrassed of how much you have. There are lots of, again, places where there are both gifts and burden.
Well, and one of the themes that both in your introduction and in the book too is about the balance and seeking that balance between the conscious and the unconscious, the difficulties that can come with having money and the difficulties that can come not having money, the masculine and the feminine, the dark and the light. So you're exploring really in such an interesting way how both sides work. And in our conversation last week, one of the things that we talked about is how pronounced the single side is, the more rational, the more logical side, as opposed to our emotional understanding of money. So talk about that a little bit more, if you would. And then I want to ask you to talk too about, you've got a great list of words and concepts here about the masculine and feminine names for and descriptors of wealth and money. So talk about both, that balance, how we're somewhat out of balance, or a lot out of balance, and then the two sides, how you see them.
Well, I think it's the external, the concrete, is the dominant view. The financial view, the bottom line, the exact numbers, we're taught to be rational about money, and that if we have emotional responses to money, that we should push them aside because they're dangerous to good money management. And we can't push feelings away, right? We can try to push them away. We can try to deny them, but they have a way of coming up and biting us from behind, or finding another way to come out. So it's a paradigm shift of appreciating that there's a rich field of the inner, that it's a window to the self. Money's an incredible way to understand the self, understand ourselves, see things about ourselves we can't see other way. It's also a doorway out to the world. It's a way to interact with the world. We need to interact with the world. It's a great vehicle. We need to pay attention to the concrete. But we need a balance. We need both. And the masculine and the feminine is just another way of talking about that. Maybe you could just take a second to see what words pop into your mind when you think about money. The range of our associations to money is very broad. But I think that most of the way that we think money operates is from a masculine perspective. So a few of the words: independence, right, the self-made man; autonomy, reason, rules, regulations, hierarchies; judgment, decisiveness, separateness, competition, goal-directedness, initiative, domination, mastery, government, the law. Those are masculine principle aspects of life. That's how we think about money. The feminine principle, part of why the book is written for women is I think that women intuitively get that money is in the feminine field. Feminine principle, so this doesn't have to do with gender, right? It has to do with how we interact with the world. The feminine is about collaboration, interdependence, connection, relationship, community, values of the heart, play, imagination, intuition, spirituality, awakening, merging, awareness, the unknowable, emotion, lots and lots of.
Flow, spontaneity, not knowing the unknowable. And that really does describe so much of what we don't talk about when we're talking about money. One of the things that you said early on in the book is because we don't really talk about money or our relationship to it, we don't have a sense of what a normal relationship to money might be. So,
Probably an unfortunate word, normal.
well, you put it in quotes.
Yeah, oh,
So,
good.
I mean, recognize it clearly that that's got lots of dimensions to it. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, as you've talked to, and I know this has become a topic in therapy for you with some of your clients. What are the ranges of normal that you think of? What are some of the behaviors, and it may be easier to describe in terms of what isn't than what is? Healthy might be a good word too, in our relationships to money.
My first thought is, yesterday at the workshop, several women said that they almost turned around at the door, right? They were really anxious about coming, and it's hard to talk about money. And the stories, so many of them had to do with, I'm embarrassed to say this, or this is, this is, the feeling that we're alone, that we face our money lives alone, which we often do, but also that we're the only ones who, go to the accountant with all these little shreds of paper and, that we're, for taxes, that we're the only ones who aren't organized, or we're the only ones, a shoebox, right. We're the only ones who, lost money in the market, or we're the, whatever it is, that we feel really shame about how we're doing things. So when you hear from other people that they feel overwhelmed by money, or they're so some of the stories yesterday, a woman who, who married someone who she thought money was not important to. She said she rejected lots of those who were dedicated to making a lot of money, but it turned out that her husband made a lot of money. So, in spite of, without intentionally going after it, and she's lived off of such a dilemma, but it presented a dilemma. So she's lived off of this money, raising the kids, and it doesn't feel like her money. And so she has a hard time spending the money. Lots of other stories, why I hesitated to tell. There's so many stories connected to that one story, one of which is that her mother said, before her husband made a lot of money, her mother said, when I turn 75, your sisters are going to buy me a new Mercedes. Immigrant family, the Mercedes really represented a lot to this mom. And this woman felt totally rejected, that she assumed that her mother assumed that she couldn't contribute in some way to, $100 or something. That both she and her brother were seen as not being able to give to the mom because the mom didn't want her donating to this gift. There is no normal, right? There is no normal. It's just that we all struggle in some area, in some relationship in our lives. We struggle, be it with our mothers. Another woman yesterday whose mother will buy her any car, any clothing. She said, if I wanted a facelift, she'd pay for my facelift, but she wouldn't pay for me to buy a house. she wouldn't pay for my graduate school. Her mother does not value that this woman is making it on her own, has a career. She said, my mother was very good at living off of other people's money. The mother had married well and married into money. So how money is used to control us, right? And have us, we're rewarded or not rewarded for different things. So all of those emotional stories that people are like, oh, I'm really, oh, I'm gonna cry, I'm embarrassed, I'm gonna cry, or this is, I'm ashamed of telling how intricate or how emotional, how personal this is to me. That, I guess that's what I'm talking about when I talk about normal, that we don't know that other people wake up in the middle of the night and are anxious about money and are worried about, are unhappy with their job and how are they going to find a new job if they can't leave the security of that job. We all thrash around with some aspect of money, even if we have a lot of it.
It's funny you say that. One of my dear friends has done very, very well for herself in life, and she has been very careful with money. She studied economics in graduate school. She knows her way around the business world extremely well. Has invested well. I mean, she, sort of textbook done it well. And not too long ago, she said something about, well, when I'm old and eating cat food. And I said, what are you talking about? And she has this fear that when she is old, she is not going to have money, and she's going to be reduced to eating cat food. Of course, cat food's more expensive than fresh vegetables, but, still, that's the way she was going to end her life. And as I've talked to, a lot of women have what I call the bag lady syndrome. And you talk about that a little bit here in the book too, and it seems to be a particularly female thing to do.
Yes.
Is to worry that at some point, no matter what's going on economically, financially for me right now, I'm gonna end up in a ditch. Talk about that a little bit.
We're also vulnerable, right? I mean, money has been about security in this country for a long time. Things seem to be changing. We all know that it's not quite as secure as it seemed like it was. But for women, we all have had people in our families, friends, ourselves, who have really been on the edge, who have, things have changed, they haven't worked, and then they have to work, or they lose their jobs, and they're in their 50s, and are they going to get another job, let alone in their 60s, and women haven't saved. Women haven't earned as much, women haven't invested. Again, there have always been women who've made money, there have always been women who invested well, but a lot of us, we're vulnerable, and men are vulnerable too. Money is something about represents the vulnerability that we all actually experience as humans, that we don't have total control over what happens in our lives, and that there are forces beyond our control. We don't know, the future's uncertain. So I think that's a part of it. And then there's probably some theme or experience in her life that even though this part of her feels really competent, and grounded financially, there's some other aspect of herself that feels incredibly vulnerable about the future.
And you mentioned too the sociological aspects as well as the psychological aspects that culture, and particularly our American culture, seems to feed that as well. That it has to do with, and you and I talked too about being in such a market-driven culture, a purchasing-oriented, more is better. Often that's the construct, around some of the economic doings in our culture. And tell us a little bit
And
about
that money,
that too.
money is so dominant, it affects everything in our lives. And that the interface of psychology and advertising is one area that psychology has been interested in money. Getting us to feel inadequate. Being used in the service of our feeling inadequate if we don't have the latest, whatever it is. And so money is very connected to the self in that way, that if we have the money to buy the new whatever, the new car, the new dress, the new computer, that some part of ourself is enhanced. We're sexier, or we're more attractive, or our personality is better, we're better people, or so that's one way that you know, buying is so connected to self in this culture.
Well, that might be changing a bit.
I think there are other values. Some of this is about the stranglehold that money's had over us all, and that seems to be breaking apart some. Not that it, you know, we need it for food, we need it for shelter, we need it for access to health care. Their education's so tied to money so these days. So I mean, it has very big, it has a very strong political life. It has implication politically, and we think about money politically, I think. But it's strangled out. Maybe that's not how you say it. It's suffocated. The other values of, you know, what, like in my story about what actually will support me in a crisis. You know, money can buy some things, but there's a lot it can't buy. What do I really value in my life? What is nourishing and heart-giving, and what gives my life meaning? Money it has a very small role in that. And so when you live in a culture where money dominates every aspect, where it's the God, I think it's really important to reflect. It's been really important for me to reflect on what other things do I value? What else is at the heart of my existence? And I think that we're beginning, I don't know how deep or how far we'll go, but that's beginning to happen. That as the external financial world's more insecure and more people are at risk, there seems like we come together, it strengthens community, it strengthens self-reliance in a different way. It strengthens our interconnection, a recognition that we all need each other to survive.
And it's within that too, and as I was reading through some of this and really giving it some thought in a way I haven't before, it's still very hard to disentangle money from so many other ways that we look at the world. So when you peel down to the next and the next layer, I had to keep peeling away what, you know, a monetary value of something or a material value of something to get down to that next layer. So it's really pervasive.
And it flips back and forth, doesn't it? I mean, because we do relate to it concretely as well. We do.
And you have to.
We have to.
We
have to.
Well, switching gears just a little bit, another thing that I think is so interesting in what you talk about throughout the book, and one of the statistics that I was aware of that got me thinking is that women now control more than 50% of the wealth in our society. And I think that is something that can change us profoundly.
Just knowing that.
Just knowing that can change us profoundly. Don't you feel powerful?
But helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, hopeful.
Yeah. Well, tell me what you think about that. And that might be something for us to talk about with the group in a little bit as well.
But to hear other people's, it's changing philanthropy, for one thing, that women tend not to care so much about having the building named after themselves, and they're more, you know, and generalizations are not exactly fair, but that they're more hands-on at their giving. They want to be involved with the organizations and the people that they're giving money to. They want an intimate, a direct relationship. You know, it's a hard time. Let me say that the statistics are that a quarter of the married women who work make more than their husband. And I've heard from a lot of single women that, single women who are making a lot of money, that it's hard to find partners.
Mm-hmm.
So we have much more access. Lots of things have changed. We have more access to money. We have our own credit. It's only been in the last 30 years that a woman can have her own credit, can buy a house on her own. I mean, it's so radical. And in so many places in the world, women can't own property. For years in this country, once you married, you lost your financial independence. Anything that you owned, inherited, or earned was your husband. So we have much more access and control, which frees us to make other choices, right? We are more apt to leave relationships that are not working or are abusive. We have more choices about how we spend our money. A lot of things haven't changed. When I talk to financial advisors, a lot of women who know better still aren't able to make decisions, be involved in the financial decisions for investing. They aren't involved, they don't know what, if they're married, what their partner or their spouse is spending, or, lots of stories of women who get divorced and find out that the taxes weren't paid, or there are lots of credit card debt, secrets, lots of secrets. We're still not talking to our partners about money. That came out loud and clear yesterday. So many people who have been in long-term relationships who aren't talking about money with their partners. So we're at a really exciting time, I think, that we have more money, we're making more money, and it's very much a transitional time where we have to do the inner work, I think, to take more responsibility and be more engaged. Recognizing that it's overwhelming to approach money, to figure things out. Money is very complex right now, financially speaking, anyway. But there are lots of women who are really good at it, and there are more and more women in the financial field. There's more and more education available and help. So that wherever we are, whether we're in debt, where we have lots of money, that we can engage. Because that's something that this psychological or symbolic approach to money teaches us. That when something is a symbol, the way we know it is through engaging with it. So if women have traditionally let someone else take responsibility for money because it's just easier, we've lost getting used to working with it and knowing ourselves in relationship to it. So beginning wherever we are is really important.
Well, it brings up so many questions and so many stories, and I want to make sure we get to some of the group's questions and stories too. One of the comments that you made to me earlier too is about healing ourselves as it relates to our relationship to money. And one of the things that we do here at Commonweal, we have some very scientific and very concrete things that we work with and on, and we also look at healing aspects of much of what we do, healing actions, healing intentions, and healing work. How have you seen people, what forms of healing have you seen and what means of healing have you experienced or helped people with around their relationships with money?
Someone in a recent workshop had a shopping addiction, and in the workshop she realized it was tied to a block in her creativity, and she started sewing and stopped shopping. Getting underneath you know, seeing where the block is, like anything that we heal, seeing what the origin of the block is, helps us to identify what we need to do in order to heal ourselves. So, yesterday somebody talked about playing Monopoly with their little brother, and that he was always focused on the money from a very early age, and then went on later in life to steal a lot of money from their mother, and be completely untrustworthy when she would loan him money. And when she told the story to herself and to us, she realized that she didn't need to engage in this dance with her brother anymore. You know, that it was that he was not in her life. He had died actually many years ago, but that she was still identifying with being the one who wouldn't have and the one who people took from, and that emotional baggage, you could say, excuse me, what she could let go of it. So there's sometimes very again, deep healing that happens from just seeing our story, forgiving with compassion, forgiving ourselves, forgiving another, connecting dots in new ways, seeing things as an adult that we couldn't see as a child, certainly true in my story. Sure. And doing the, sometimes the healing is just that simple, you know, sometimes it requires going over and over and over something.
Well, and you talked about shame too. So a lot, you know, the shame that so many of us hold around money, or our own relationships to money, or our own what we perceive as poor uses of or you know, transactions with money. And so I imagine healing the shame or bringing it out into light in some ways.
Exactly. I think shame is really something that if we can tolerate, if we feel it, that it helps. There's always something humanizing under shame. So if we can feel it, that it lessens, and we get to understand it, and recognizing that we are not our money. You know,
Right.
that our ego has attached so much to what we had or what we didn't have, and our value, our sense of self-worth, and self-esteem came so much, was influenced so much by that, but that we are much larger beings than that.
As unwise as I know it can be to ask a therapist about advice, you know, because you're supposed to be bringing out of us, right? As opposed to, but from what you've seen and learned in this work, Kate, what advice would you have for women as they are looking at their relationship to money, to wealth, to all that surrounds it?
I think probably the things I've said, which have to do with finding other women to talk to, you know, finding a trusted friend or friends to talk to. And I think I say in the book that it might not be the person who helped you through the divorce or through the diagnosis of an illness or through the job transfer, but someone who you can really be open with about money, where it's safe. And I think you know, not being afraid to get our hands into it, you know, to wherever we need to put attention, if it's the financial or the emotional, to again, to be curious about it, and to recognize that it's a difficult topic, but it so hugely impacts the quality of our life. Again, not with how much we have. It doesn't matter how much we have or how little we have, that we can really have some more freedom, and feel more support. I think when we engage with our money life, and I think to value the intuitive, the feminine in terms of money, to open to that, and to have the experience of what it feels like to hand money to somebody else, what it feels like to figure out the tip or to choose to buy something. I had a kind of a rocky day on Wednesday in terms of the book, and I went and bought an electric toothbrush, and it was such a gratifying experience. I could not believe the satisfaction, you know? There's something about having a need. I could be efficacious. I could make this happen. And it gave me all sorts of insights into buying and, you know, the distraction of buying and but it's interesting to live in that field. It's interesting to go through the habits, our daily habits, and to bring imagination to that, and to bring emotion to that, and to enliven an area that is enlivening. It enlivens our lives to look at money in this way.
And to have the conversations and hear the stories. I think that's been just a remarkable part of this too. And you share that with us in the book. I mean, even if we aren't having conversations one-on-one with people about their money lives, we hear them through the stories you bring.